Imagine sending your twin boys to summer camp, only to have them vanish without a trace. I know you're tired of mystery stories that promise everything but deliver nothing. This one's different. When camp counselor Sharon finally opened that sealed cabin wall 12 years later, what she found changed everything we thought we knew. But here's what nobody expected. The boys had left behind 3 clues that would unravel a conspiracy bigger than anyone imagined. The first clue? It wasn't even meant to be found. Before we dive into this story, I want to acknowledge you're here seeking the truth about these twins. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It means everything to know we're uncovering this mystery together. It was the summer of 2012 when 8-year-old twins Jake and Tommy Martinez arrived at Camp Wildwood. Their parents, Maria and Carlos, had saved up all year for this special trip. The boys were excited beyond words, their first time away from home. But what started as a dream vacation quickly became every parent's worst nightmare, because on the 3rd night of camp, something happened that would change multiple families forever. Jake and Tommy were identical twins, but their personalities couldn't be more different. Jake was the quiet observer, always carrying his small notebook where he wrote down everything interesting he saw. Tommy was the adventurer, the one who made friends instantly and never met a tree he couldn't climb. Their camp counselor, a young college student named Mark, noticed them right away. "Those Martinez boys are special," Mark told the other counselors. Jake's got this way of noticing things others miss. And Tommy, well, Tommy's got enough energy to power the whole camp. The twins quickly became popular with the other kids. They shared bunk beds in Cabin 7 right next to the old storage room that had been sealed off for years. But there was something about that sealed room that Jake couldn't stop thinking about. From their first night, Jake kept staring at the wall that separated their room from the old storage area. Tommy thought his brother was just being weird, but Jake insisted he could hear something. "It's like scratching," Jake whispered to Tommy during lights out, "like someone's trying to get out." The other kids in Cabin 7 laughed it off. "Old buildings make noises," they said. But Jake wasn't convinced. He started writing in his notebook about the sounds, the timing, everything he noticed. Tommy, being the loyal brother, decided to help Jake investigate. They began staying awake after everyone else fell asleep, listening carefully to the wall. On the 2nd night, they heard it again. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause. It was too regular to be random, too purposeful to be just old wood settling. That's when Jake made a discovery that would change everything. Jake noticed something the adults had missed. Near the bottom of the sealed wall, there was a small gap where the wood didn't quite meet the floor. It was tiny, barely big enough for a pencil to fit through. But Jake was a careful observer, and he saw something glinting in that gap during the day when sunlight hit it, just right. Using a flashlight after lights out, Jake and Tommy investigated. What they found made their hearts race. It was a small piece of metal, like part of a chain or bracelet, but it wasn't old and rusty like you'd expect from something left behind years ago. It was shiny, new-looking. "Someone's been in there recently," Jake whispered to Tommy. "Really recently." Tommy wanted to tell the counselors, but Jake had a different idea. If someone was hiding in that sealed room, they needed to be smart about it, because Jake had noticed something else, something that made him realize they might be in real danger. Jake had been watching the counselors carefully, and he noticed that Mark, their counselor, always seemed nervous around that sealed wall. Whenever kids got too close or asked questions about it, Mark would quickly redirect their attention elsewhere. But there was something else that bothered Jake even more. During meal times, Jake observed that Mark would sometimes disappear for long periods. He'd say he was going to the bathroom or checking on supplies, but Jake timed these absences. 15 minutes, 20 minutes, sometimes even 30. That was way too long for normal camp duties. Tommy thought Jake was being paranoid, but Jake's notebook was filling up with observations. Mark's disappearances always happened at the same times. always when the other counselors were busy with activities, and always when most of the kids were distracted. Then Jake noticed something that made his blood run cold. Jake realized that Mark's disappearances lined up perfectly with the scratching sounds they heard from the sealed room. Every time Mark left during the day, that night they would hear the scratching. It was like someone was trying to communicate, but only when they knew Mark wasn't around to hear it. Jake shared his theory with Tommy. What if someone's trapped in there? What if Mark is keeping them prisoner? Tommy's eyes went wide. It sounded crazy, but Jake's evidence was hard to ignore. The twins decided they needed to investigate further, but they had to be careful. They couldn't tell the other counselors. What if they were in on it too? They couldn't call their parents. Camp had a strict no-phone policy. They were on their own, 2 8-year-old boys trying to solve what might be a serious crime. That's when Jake came up with a plan that would either save someone's life or put them in terrible danger. Jake's plan was simple, but dangerous. They would wait until Mark left on one of his mysterious trips, then try to communicate with whoever was in the sealed room. If someone was trapped, they could help. If it was something else, well, they'd figure that out when they got there. The next day, during afternoon swimming, Mark disappeared again. Jake nudged Tommy. This was their chance. They slipped away from the pool area and ran back to cabin 7. Their hearts were pounding as they approached the sealed wall. "Hello?" Jake whispered through the small gap. "Is someone in there?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, very quietly, they heard a voice. It was weak, scared, but definitely human. "Help me," the voice whispered back. "Please help me." Tommy grabbed Jake's arm. This was real. Someone was actually trapped in there. But when the voice spoke again, what it said made both boys realize they had stumbled onto something much bigger than they imagined. "There are others," the voice whispered urgently. "3 of us. We've been here for weeks. Mark, he's not who you think he is." Jake and Tommy looked at each other in horror. 3 people trapped for weeks? This wasn't just a simple case of someone accidentally getting locked in a storage room. "We're kids from other camps," the voice continued. "Mark took us during field trips. Our families think we're missing, but we're right here." The voice was getting weaker, more desperate. "He brings us food sometimes, but not enough. We're getting sick." Jake's mind raced. This was kidnapping. This was serious criminal stuff that adults handled, not kids, but they were the only ones who knew. They were these people's only hope. Then Tommy heard something that made him grab Jake's arm in panic. Footsteps. Heavy boots walking toward cabin 7. Mark was coming back early. Jake and Tommy had maybe 30 seconds before he'd see them by the wall. "We'll come back," Jake whispered quickly through the gap. "Don't give up. We're going to help you." The twins ran to their bunks and pretended to be napping just as Mark walked in. He looked around suspiciously, his eyes lingering on the sealed wall. "You boys been here long?" he asked casually. "Yeah, we got tired from swimming," Tommy said, trying to keep his voice normal. Mark nodded, but Jake noticed he was checking the wall carefully, looking for any signs that someone had been near it. After Mark left, Jake realized something terrifying. If Mark was this careful, this paranoid about the wall, it meant he was smart, experienced. This wasn't his first time doing something like this. And if Mark was that smart, Jake and Tommy were in more danger than they knew. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. 3 people were trapped just a few feet away from him, and he was the only one who could help them. But he was 8 years old. What could he possibly do against an adult criminal? Tommy was thinking the same thing. "Maybe we should tell someone," Tommy whispered. "But who?" Jake whispered back. "What if the other counselors are helping Mark? What if they don't believe us? What if Mark finds out we know and—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Tommy understood. Jake made a decision that showed wisdom beyond his years. "We need evidence," he said. "If we're going to tell someone, we need proof, and we need a plan to make sure those people stay safe." Tommy nodded. His brother was right, but getting evidence meant taking huge risks. because Jake had an idea that would require them to do something that could get them caught. Jake's plan was to create a record of everything they knew. He would document Mark's behavior, the voices from the wall, and any other evidence they could find. But more importantly, they needed to find a way to help the trapped people without alerting Mark. "We'll leave them our food," Jake decided. "During meal times, we'll sneak back some of our snacks and slide them through the gap." It wasn't much, but it might help keep the prisoners alive longer. Tommy agreed, and they started their secret mission. Over the next 2 days, the twins became expert sneaks. They learned Mark's schedule perfectly. They figured out which counselors were where at what times. They even learned how to move through the camp without being seen. For 8-year-olds, they were becoming surprisingly good at covert operations. But on the 3rd day of their mission, Jake discovered something that changed everything. While sliding crackers through the gap, Jake heard the voices more clearly than ever before. There were definitely 3 people, and they were weak, scared, and desperate. But what Jake heard next made his stomach drop. One of the voices was talking about how long they'd been there. "It's been 2 months since Mark took me from Camp Riverside," one voice said. "My parents must think I'm dead." 2 months. Jake realized that Mark had been doing this for a long time, taking kids from different camps. This was organized. This was planned. Jake also realized something else. If Mark had been doing this for months, he must have a system. He must have figured out how to make kids disappear without anyone connecting the disappearances to him, which meant Jake and Tommy were in more danger than they thought. Because if Mark could make 3 kids disappear without a trace, what would stop him from making 2 more disappear? Jake noticed that Mark was watching him, and Tommy more closely now. During activities, Mark's eyes would follow them. During meals, he'd sit where he could see their table. It was subtle, but Jake's trained observer skills picked up on it. "He knows we know something," Jake whispered to Tommy during craft time. "We need to be extra careful." But being careful was getting harder. The voices from the wall were getting weaker, more desperate. The trapped people needed help soon, or they might not survive much longer. Jake made a difficult decision. They couldn't wait for the perfect moment to get help. They had to act now, even if it meant putting themselves at risk. "Tomorrow night," Jake told Tommy, "we're going to try to get them out." Tommy's eyes went wide. "How?" Jake had been thinking about this. The wall was sealed, but it was just wood and nails. And Jake had noticed something about that wall that even the adults had missed. Jake had been studying the wall for days, and he noticed that one section looked different from the rest. The wood was slightly warped, and the nails seemed loose. It was near the bottom, close to where they'd been communicating through the gap. "If we can find something to pry with," Jake explained to Tommy, "we might be able to pull some boards loose, just enough to make a hole big enough for people to crawl through." It was risky, but it might work. They needed tools, but they were at summer camp. The only tools around were in the maintenance shed, which was locked. However, Jake had noticed that the camp's maintenance worker, Joe, sometimes left his toolbox outside when he was working on projects. The twins spent the day watching Joe's routine. He was fixing the dock by the lake, and his toolbox was sitting unguarded for long periods. But getting to those tools would require Jake and Tommy to cross an open area where Mark could easily see them. During the afternoon rest period, Jake and Tommy saw their chance. Joe had left his toolbox by the dock and walked into the woods to check on some trail maintenance. Mark was in the main lodge with the other counselors. This was their window. The twins snuck down to the lake and quickly searched through Joe's tools. They found a crowbar and a small hammer, perfect for their plan. But as they were about to leave, they heard voices coming from the lodge. The counselors were coming outside. Jake and Tommy hid behind a large tree with the tools. They could see Mark scanning the area, looking for something or someone. He seemed agitated, more nervous than usual. After what felt like forever, the counselors went back inside. The twins made it back to their cabin with the tools hidden under their sweatshirts. But as they reached their cabin, Jake realized they had made a critical mistake. Jake suddenly realized that Joe would notice his tools were missing. When Joe discovered the theft, he'd tell the counselors, and they'd search all the cabins. If Mark found the tools in their cabin, he'd know exactly what Jake and Tommy were planning. "We have to do this tonight," Jake whispered urgently to Tommy, "before Joe notices the tools are gone." Tommy nodded, but his hands were shaking. They were 8 years old, and they were about to attempt a rescue mission that could go horribly wrong. As the sun set, Jake reviewed their plan one more time. They would wait until everyone was asleep, then use the tools to carefully pry boards loose from the wall. They'd help the trapped people escape, then all of them would run to the main road and flag down a car for help. It was a simple plan, but Jake knew that simple plans were often the best ones. What Jake didn't know was that someone else was making plans for that night, too. At midnight, Jake and Tommy crept out of their bunks. The other kids in cabin 7 were fast asleep. Even the night sounds of the forest seemed quieter than usual, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Jake knelt by the wall with the crowbar while Tommy kept watch. "Hello," Jake whispered through the gap. "We're here to get you out." The response was immediate and filled with hope. "Thank God," one voice whispered back. "Hurry, Mark was here earlier. He seemed angry about something." Jake carefully positioned the crowbar and started prying at the loose boards. The wood creaked softly, but it was working. One board came loose, then another. They were making a hole big enough for a person to crawl through. "Almost there," Jake whispered. Tommy was watching the door, ready to warn Jake if anyone came. That's when they heard the sound that made their blood freeze. Heavy footsteps in the hallway. Mark was coming, and he was moving fast. "Jake!" Tommy whispered urgently. "Hide the tools!" But it was too late. The door burst open, and Mark stood there in his flashlight's beam, his face twisted with anger. "Well, well," Mark said, his voice calm but terrifying. "Looks like we have some little detectives." Jake stood up slowly, the crowbar still in his hands. Tommy moved closer to his brother. They were trapped, but Jake's mind was still working. "The police are coming," Jake said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "We already called them." Mark laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Nice try, kid, but camp phones don't work at night, and I've got your parents' numbers. They think you're safe in bed." Mark took a step closer. "Here's what's going to happen." But Mark didn't finish his sentence because something happened that nobody expected. Another voice spoke from the darkness behind Mark. "Step away from the boys, Mark." It was Joe, the maintenance worker, and he was holding a much bigger crowbar than Jake's. "I've been watching you for weeks, waiting for proof." Mark spun around shocked. "Joe! What are you doing here?" Joe stepped into the light, and Jake could see he was angry, really angry. "My nephew disappeared from a camp in Colorado last month. When I heard about the missing kids pattern, I took this job to investigate." Joe looked at Jake and Tommy. "You boys are braver than most adults. You figured out what I've been trying to prove for weeks." Mark was backing toward the wall, but Joe blocked his path. "It's over, Mark. The state police are already on their way." Mark's face changed from anger to panic. "You don't understand," he said desperately. "I'm not working alone." Mark's words sent a chill through everyone in the room. "This is bigger than just me," he continued, his voice shaking. "There are others. Other camps, other counselors. If you turn me in, they'll know someone's onto them. They'll disappear, and you'll never find the rest of the missing kids." Joe's grip tightened on his crowbar. "How many kids are we talking about?" Mark looked at the hole Jake had made in the wall, then back at Joe. "Dozens. Maybe more. It's been going on for years." Jake felt sick. The 3 people trapped behind the wall were just a small part of something much bigger. A network of criminals who had been stealing children from summer camps across the country. Tommy grabbed Jake's arm. "We have to help all of them," Tommy whispered. Joe nodded grimly. "First, we get these 3 out safely. Then we make Mark tell us everything." But as Joe moved toward the wall, Mark made a desperate move. Mark suddenly lunged toward the window, trying to escape. But Joe was ready for him. Years of construction work had made Joe strong and fast. He grabbed Mark before he could get through the window. "Jake, Tommy," Joe called out, "help me get those people out of the wall while I hold Mark." The twins worked together, pulling boards away from the hole they'd started. Soon the opening was big enough for a person to crawl through. The first person to emerge was a girl about 12 years old. She was thin and weak, but alive. Then came a boy about 10, followed by another girl around 14. They were all dirty, scared, and clearly hadn't eaten well in weeks. "Thank you," the oldest girl whispered to Jake and Tommy. "We thought we were going to die in there." Tommy started crying, partly from relief, partly from anger that anyone would hurt kids like this. But their relief was short-lived, because Mark had one more surprise for them. "You still don't get it," Mark said, even though Joe had him pinned down. "I was trying to save these kids. I'm not the bad guy here." Everyone stared at Mark in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Joe demanded. Mark's voice became urgent. "There's a man who comes to different camps. He pays counselors to help him take kids. The counselors who refuse, they disappear too. I took these kids to hide them from him. I was protecting them." Jake's mind raced. Could Mark be telling the truth? But then the oldest girl spoke up. "He's lying," she said firmly. "He works for the man. We heard them talking. Mark gets paid for every kid he brings." Mark's face fell. His last desperate lie had been exposed. Joe shook his head in disgust. "The police will sort this out. Right now, we need to get these kids medical attention and call their families." But the nightmare wasn't over yet. Within an hour, the camp was filled with police cars, ambulances, and FBI agents. The 3 rescued children were taken to the hospital, and Mark was arrested. Jake and Tommy found themselves in the middle of one of the biggest criminal investigations in the state's history. Detective Sarah Chen interviewed the twins. "You boys are heroes," she told them. "Your bravery saved those 3 kids and helped us uncover a major child trafficking ring." Jake felt proud, but also overwhelmed. This was bigger than anything he'd ever imagined. The detective explained that Mark was part of a network that had been operating for over 5 years. They would identify vulnerable children at various camps, then stage fake accidents or disappearances to take them. "Your evidence and Joe's investigation will help us shut down the entire operation," Detective Chen said. Tommy asked the question that was bothering both of them. Are there more kids still trapped somewhere? Detective Chen's answer would haunt them for years. "We think there are at least 20 more children being held at various locations," Detective Chen admitted. "Mark is already giving us information about the other sites in exchange for a reduced sentence." The twins couldn't believe it. 20 more kids, all taken from their families, all trapped and scared. "The good news," the detective continued, "is that your actions tonight probably saved dozens of future victims. We've been trying to crack this case for 2 years. She showed them a map with red pins marking all the camps where children had disappeared. There were pins in 12 different states. Jake looked at his notebook, filled with all his observations about Mark. "Can this help?" he asked, offering it to Detective Chen. She flipped through it and smiled. "Jake, this is better detective work than some of my officers do. You documented everything perfectly." But there was still one more shock waiting for the Martinez family. The next morning, Detective Chen called Jake and Tommy's parents with surprising news. "Your boys weren't random targets," she explained. "Mark had been watching them specifically." Maria Martinez felt her heart drop. "What do you mean?" "The trafficking ring researches families before they take children," Detective Chen said. "They look for kids whose parents work long hours, who don't have extended family nearby, who might not be missed immediately. Your boys fit that profile." Carlos Martinez was angry. "So they were planning to take Jake and Tommy?" Detective Chen nodded. "Mark was probably going to stage their disappearance within the next few days. Instead, they uncovered his operation and saved themselves and 3 other kids." The twins looked at each other with wide eyes. They hadn't just stumbled onto a crime, they had been the next targets. And there was something else Detective Chen needed to tell them. "Because of your boys' bravery," Detective Chen continued, "the FBI wants to give them a special recognition award. They've also asked if Jake would be interested in a junior detective program when he gets older." Jake's eyes lit up. All those hours of observation and note-taking had actually mattered. Tommy wasn't interested in detective work, but he was proud of his brother. "Jake always notices things," Tommy told the detective. "I just helped him be brave enough to act on it." The detective smiled. "That's exactly what good partners do." Over the next few weeks, Jake and Tommy's story made national news. They appeared on television shows and were invited to speak at schools about safety and courage. But for the twins, the most important moment came when they got to meet the 3 kids they had saved. That meeting would change how they thought about their experience forever. 2 months later, Jake and Tommy met Sarah, 14, Miguel, 10, and Emma, 12, at a special ceremony. The 3 survivors were healthy again, back with their families, but they would never forget their time in that sealed room. "We heard you whispering to us every night," Sarah told the twins. "When you brought us food, when you promised you'd help us. That's what kept us alive. We stopped believing anyone cared, but you proved us wrong." Miguel hugged both twins tightly. "I have a little brother your age," he said. "I hope if he's ever in trouble, someone as brave as you guys will help him." Emma was quieter, but she gave Jake her own notebook, one she'd started keeping after her rescue. "You inspired me to pay attention to details too," she said. The ceremony was beautiful, but what happened next was even more meaningful. Because the survivors had a special request for Jake and Tommy. Sarah, Miguel, and Emma had been working with child safety organizations to create a program that would help other kids recognize dangerous situations. "We want you to help us," Sarah explained to Jake and Tommy. "Your story shows kids that they can make a difference even when adults don't believe them." The program they created was called Trust Your Instincts. It taught children to pay attention to their surroundings, trust their gut feelings, and know how to get help when something seemed wrong. Jake's detailed observation skills became a central part of the curriculum. Most kids would have just heard weird noises and forgotten about them, Miguel pointed out. But Jake paid attention and wrote everything down. That's what made the difference. Tommy added his own lesson, and sometimes being brave means helping your family even when you're scared. The program became more successful than anyone expected. Within a year, Trust Your Instincts was being taught in schools across the country. Jake and Tommy traveled to different states, sharing their story and teaching other kids how to stay safe. They met with police departments, FBI agents, and child safety experts. Detective Chen, who had become a family friend, told them about the impact of their actions. "Because of you two, we've rescued all 23 children from the trafficking ring. More importantly, we've prevented hundreds of other kidnappings by shutting down their operation." Jake kept detailed records of every presentation they gave, every kid they met, every letter they received. His notebook collection had grown to over a dozen volumes. Tommy had become an expert at helping nervous kids feel comfortable enough to ask questions. "We're not just telling our story," Tommy explained to a reporter. "We're showing other kids that they have power too." But the biggest surprise was still coming. 3 years after the camp incident, Jake and Tommy received a letter that made them cry. It was from Joe, the maintenance worker who had helped them that night. He had news that would change everything. "I found him," Joe wrote. "I found my nephew Danny. He was being held at a facility in Oregon, And because of the information from Mark's arrest, we were able to rescue him and 15 other children. Danny had been missing for over a year, and his family had given up hope. Joe invited Jake and Tommy to meet Danny, and the reunion was emotional for everyone. Danny was 12 now, older and more serious than most kids his age, but he was alive and safe. "Uncle Joe told me about you two," Danny said to the twins. "You saved my life, and you probably don't even know it." Danny had something important to tell them about their impact. Danny explained how the rescue operation had worked. When they arrested Mark, he gave them information about other locations. "But it was your detailed notes that helped them understand the whole system," Danny told Jake. "The way you documented everything showed them patterns they hadn't seen before." Jake was amazed. "You mean my notebook helped find you?" Danny nodded. "Your notebook helped find lots of us. The FBI said your observations were so detailed that they could predict where other facilities might be located." Tommy was proud of his brother, but he was also thinking about something else. "How many more kids are still out there?" he asked Joe. Joe's expression became serious. "We think we've found most of them, but trafficking never completely stops. There are always new criminals, new victims." "That's why what you boys do is so important," Joe continued. "Every kid you teach, every person you inspire to pay attention and speak up, helps prevent future crimes." And that's when Jake had his biggest idea yet. "What if we could teach kids to be detectives before they need to be?" Jake asked. "What if we could create a program that teaches observation skills and safety awareness as part of regular school?" Tommy's eyes lit up. He loved it when his brother got excited about helping people. Jake had been thinking about this for months. "We could teach kids how to keep safety notebooks, how to recognize unusual behavior, and how to report concerns to trusted adults." The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Turn every aware child into a potential lifesaver. Joe and Detective Chen loved the idea. Within 6 months, Jake and Tommy had developed Young Observers, a program that taught elementary school children basic observation and safety skills. The program was designed to be fun and engaging, not scary. "We're not trying to make kids paranoid," Jake explained to educators. "We're trying to make them aware and confident." The program's first test would prove just how effective it could be. 6 months after launching Young Observers, Jake and Tommy received an urgent call from Detective Chen. "You need to know about this," she said excitedly. "A 10-year-old girl in Michigan just prevented a kidnapping using skills from your program." The girl, named Ashley, had been walking home from school when a man in a van started following her. Instead of panicking, Ashley remembered the observation techniques Jake had taught. She noticed the van's license plate, the man's appearance, and the exact time and location. She went straight to a trusted adult and reported everything. "Ashley's detailed report helped us catch the man before he could hurt anyone," Detective Chen explained. "He was a known predator who had been targeting children in that area for weeks." Ashley's parents credited the Young Observers program with saving their daughter's life. When Jake and Tommy met Ashley, she gave Jake a hug and showed him her own observation notebook. "I want to help keep other kids safe too," she said. Ashley's success story would inspire something even bigger. Ashley's story made national news, and suddenly everyone wanted to know about the Young Observers program. Schools from all over the country began requesting presentations from Jake and Tommy. Child safety organizations offered to help expand the program. "We're getting requests from Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom," Tommy told Jake excitedly. "Kids everywhere want to learn how to be safe and help others." Jake was thrilled, but also a bit overwhelmed. They were just teenagers now, but they were running a program that was helping children worldwide. The boys decided to create training materials so that other adults could teach the Young Observers program in their communities. Detective Chen helped them develop age-appropriate curricula for different grade levels. Joe contributed practical safety tips from his law enforcement experience. "You boys have created something that will help children for generations," Detective Chen told them. "Your camp experience has become a gift to the world." But the most meaningful recognition was yet to come. When Jake and Tommy were 15, they received an invitation that left their entire family speechless. The President of the United States wanted to meet them and present them with the Presidential Medal of Freedom for their contributions to child safety. "This is the highest civilian honor in our country," their mother Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "My boys are going to meet the President." The ceremony was held at the White House, and Sarah, Miguel, Emma, Danny, and Ashley were all invited to attend. Standing in the Oval Office, Jake thought back to that scared 8-year-old boy who just wanted to help some trapped people. "Your courage as children has saved hundreds of lives," the President said during the ceremony. "You've shown that heroes come in all ages." Tommy squeezed Jake's hand as they received their medals. But the President had one more surprise for them. "I'm announcing today that young observers will become a mandatory part of safety education in all American schools," the President declared. Jake and Tommy looked at each other in amazement. Their little program, born from a terrifying night at summer camp, was going to help every child in America. The announcement made international headlines. Countries around the world began adopting similar programs. Jake's simple idea of teaching kids to pay attention and trust their instincts was becoming a global movement for child safety. 7 years ago, you were just two scared boys trying to help some strangers," Detective Chen said at the White House celebration. "Today, you're changing how the world protects children." Joe, now retired from maintenance work and full-time with child safety advocacy, nodded proudly. "Your parents should be incredibly proud." Maria and Carlos Martinez could barely contain their emotions. Their sons had turned a nightmare into hope for millions of families, and the impact was already showing incredible results. By their 16th birthday, Jake and Tommy had documented the program's incredible success. Young observers had directly prevented over 300 attempted kidnappings worldwide. The program had been taught to more than 2 million children across 15 countries. "The statistics are amazing," Jake told a United Nations conference on child safety. "But the real impact is in the individual stories. Every Ashley, every child who trusted their instincts and stayed safe." Tommy added, "Every kid who helped another kid, every adult who listened when a child reported something suspicious." The twins had also inspired a new generation of young activists. Children from around the world were creating their own safety programs, writing safety books, and becoming advocates in their communities. "They're doing what we did," Tommy observed. "They're turning their experiences into help for others." Detective Chen, now head of a national child safety task force, often cited the Martinez brothers as proof that age doesn't determine impact, but their most emotional moment was still ahead. 10 years after that night at Camp Wildwood, Jake and Tommy organized a reunion of everyone who had been part of their story. Sarah was now in college studying criminal justice. Miguel had become a counselor at summer camps, helping create safer environments for children. Emma was writing a book about her experience and recovery. Danny, Joe's nephew, had joined the FBI and was working on child trafficking cases. Ashley, the girl from Michigan, was teaching young observers in her high school. "You two changed the direction of all our lives," Sarah told the Martinez brothers at the reunion. Joe, now in his 70s but still energetic, brought a special surprise to the reunion. "I have something that belongs to you," he said to Jake, pulling out a familiar notebook. It was Jake's original camp notebook, the one with all his observations about Mark. The FBI kept it as evidence for years, but they finally released it. Opening that notebook would bring back memories that would change everything again. Jake opened his old notebook with trembling hands. As he read his 8-year-old handwriting, he realized something incredible. "Tommy, look at this," he said, pointing to 3 specific entries. "I documented 3 things that I didn't even realize were clues at the time. The first clue was Jake's timing chart of Mark's disappearances, evidence that showed a clear pattern. The second clue was his sketch of the metal piece they'd found in the wall gap. It turned out to be part of a restraint system used by the trafficking ring. The third clue was his note about Mark's nervous behavior around the wall, behavioral evidence that helped FBI profilers understand how the criminals operated." "These weren't just random observations," Detective Chen said, reading over Jake's shoulder. "You created a perfect criminal profile without even knowing it." Tommy shook his head in amazement. "We were collecting evidence the whole time." But there was something else in that notebook that nobody had ever noticed. On the last page Jake had written at camp, there was something that made everyone in the room go silent. In his 8-year-old handwriting, Jake had written, "If something happens to me and Tommy, look in the wall. We tried to help. We left clues so someone could finish what we started." Jake didn't remember writing those words, but there they were, a message from his younger self to the future. "You knew," Emma said softly. "Even as a little kid, you knew this was bigger than just helping 3 people." Tommy put his arm around his brother. "You were already thinking like a detective." Joe wiped tears from his eyes. "You boys prepared for the worst, but hoped for the best. That's exactly what good investigators do." The notebook had contained not just observations, but a backup plan, evidence that would have helped solve the case even if Jake and Tommy hadn't survived to tell their story. And that realization led to their most important decision yet. Reading that old notebook made Jake and Tommy realize they needed to do more. "We've been teaching kids to observe and report," Jake said, "but we should also be teaching them to document everything, just in case." It was a sobering thought, preparing children to leave evidence that could help solve crimes even if the worst happened. They developed an advanced Young Observers program for older children, teaching them more sophisticated documentation and evidence preservation techniques. "We're not trying to turn kids into detectives," Tommy explained to concerned parents. "We're giving them tools that could save their lives and help others." The program was controversial at first. Some people thought it was too serious for children. But when Ashley, now 17, spoke at a school board meeting, she changed minds. "These skills didn't make me paranoid or scared," she said. "They made me confident and prepared." And then something happened that proved Ashley right. 2 months after launching the advanced program, a 13-year-old boy named Marcus used the new documentation techniques to expose a different kind of dangerous situation. He had noticed that his teacher was behaving inappropriately with students and used Jake's methods to document everything carefully. Marcus's detailed evidence led to the teacher's arrest and the discovery that he had been abusing students for over 2 years. Marcus saved dozens of kids from ongoing trauma, Detective Chen reported to Jake and Tommy. His documentation was so thorough that the case was solved in weeks instead of months. When they met Marcus, he showed them his evidence notebook. It was organized exactly like Jake's original camp notebook: times, dates, behavioral observations, and careful documentation of concerning incidents. "You taught me that kids can be investigators too," Marcus told Jake. "You taught me that my observations matter." Marcus's success led to a discovery that would shock everyone. Marcus's case opened everyone's eyes to how often dangerous situations go unnoticed because children don't know how to document or report them effectively. Detective Chen shared startling statistics with Jake and Tommy. "We estimate that teaching observation and documentation skills to children could help solve thousands of cases every year." The twins realized their mission was even more important than they'd thought. They weren't just preventing kidnappings. They were empowering children to protect themselves and others from all kinds of dangerous situations. Bullying, abuse, neglect, and criminal activity all relied on children not knowing how to effectively report what they witnessed. Every child who learns these skills becomes a guardian for other children, Tommy said during a television interview. Jake added, "We're creating a network of young people who refuse to let bad things happen in silence." The impact was already showing. Schools using the Young Observers program reported significant decreases in bullying and inappropriate behavior, but their biggest challenge was about to begin. Not everyone supported the Martinez brothers' work. Some criminals and corrupt officials began pushing back against programs that taught children to be observant and report suspicious behavior. "You're making it harder for us to operate," one arrested trafficker told police, referring to the widespread adoption of observation skills. Jake and Tommy started receiving threatening messages. People who profited from crime didn't want children to be educated about recognizing and reporting dangerous situations. "This means we're winning," Detective Chen told them. "Criminals only threaten people who are effectively stopping their activities." The threats made their parents worried, but Jake and Tommy were determined to continue their work. "If bad people are trying to stop us, that proves what we're doing is important," Jake said. Tommy agreed. "We can't let fear stop us from helping kids stay safe." Law enforcement agencies increased security around the Martinez family, and the threats only made more people support their mission. Then came the threat that changed everything. One morning, Jake and Tommy discovered that someone had broken into their house during the night. Nothing was stolen, but their computers had been tampered with, and a threatening note was left on Jake's desk. "Stop teaching kids to be detectives or become victims yourselves." Their parents wanted them to quit their safety work, but Jake and Tommy refused. "This is exactly why kids need to learn these skills," Tommy argued. "Bad people want children to be helpless and silent." Jake agreed. "If we stop now, we're telling every criminal that threatening children's advocates works." Instead of backing down, they decided to use this experience to teach an even more important lesson. They documented the break-in carefully, worked with police to investigate, and turned the incident into a teaching moment about home security and threat assessment. "Someone tried to scare us into silence," Jake told a group of students. "But they just proved why this work matters." Their response to the threat would inspire their most powerful program yet. Jake and Tommy created a new component of Young Observers focused on resilience and courage. "Learning to observe and document is important," Jake explained, "but learning to stay strong when bad people try to intimidate you is equally important." The Resilience program taught children that standing up for safety and justice sometimes comes with challenges, but that courage grows stronger when it's shared with others. "We're not alone in this work," Tommy told students. "Every person who learns these skills makes all of us safer." The program included lessons about finding trusted adults, building support networks, and understanding that bullies and criminals often try to silence people who threaten their power. "When someone tries to scare you away from doing the right thing," Jake taught, "that usually means you're doing something very important." Children responded enthusiastically to the resilience training. They created buddy systems, support groups, and even began teaching the skills to younger children. And then came the moment that proved their approach was working. 5 years later, Detective Chen called Jake and Tommy with incredible news. "We've just completed the largest child trafficking bust in FBI history," she announced, "and it all started with observation reports from children trained in your programs." Over 200 children had been rescued from a massive international trafficking operation. The investigation began when multiple children from different states reported suspicious activities using the documentation methods Jake and Tommy had taught. "Your program created a network of young investigators that we never could have built with adult agents alone," Detective Chen explained. The conspiracy had involved corrupt officials, multiple organizations, and criminal networks across several countries. "It was exactly what you suspected that night at camp," Detective Chen said. A conspiracy bigger than anyone imagined, but this time we had thousands of trained young observers helping us expose it. Jake looked at Tommy with tears in his eyes. Their childhood nightmare had become the foundation for the largest child rescue operation in history. But the most emotional moment was yet to come. At the celebration for the successful trafficking bust, Jake and Tommy were approached by a woman they didn't recognize. "You probably don't remember me," she said, "but I'm Sharon, the camp counselor who opened that sealed cabin wall all those years ago." Jake and Tommy stared in confusion. In their story, they had called the counselor Sharon, but she had never actually been part of their experience. "I heard about what you boys did at Camp Wildwood, and I need to tell you something important," Sharon continued. 3 months after your rescue, I was working at a different camp when I found a sealed wall in one of our old cabins. Remembering your story, I opened it and found evidence of another trafficking operation. Sharon's discovery had led to the rescue of 5 more children and the arrest of 2 more criminals. Sharon's revelation would tie together everything they had experienced. Your story inspired dozens of people to pay attention to sealed spaces, abandoned areas, and suspicious behavior at camps and schools, Sharon explained. What you did that night created a ripple effect that's been saving children for over a decade. Jake realized that their childhood experience had become something much larger than they ever imagined. Every person who heard their story and became more observant, every child who learned to trust their instincts, every adult who took suspicious behavior seriously, all of it stemmed from 2 8-year-old boys who refused to ignore scratching sounds in a wall. "We thought we were just helping 3 people, Tommy said to Sharon. "We never imagined it would become all this," Sharon smiled. "That's how real change happens. It starts with people who see a problem and refuse to look away." Detective Chen joined their conversation. "The final count is over 2,000 children rescued directly or indirectly because of your work. That's 2,000 families reunited, 2,000 lives saved." But Jake had one final realization that would define their legacy. Standing in that room full of law enforcement officers, rescued children, and safety advocates, Jake understood something profound. "Tommy," he said to his brother, "we didn't just solve a crime that night at camp. We started a movement. Every child they had taught, every adult they had inspired, every criminal they had helped catch, it all traced back to an 8-year-old boy who kept a notebook and refused to ignore concerning observations." Our real superpower wasn't being brave that night, Jake reflected. It was teaching other people that they could be brave too. Tommy nodded, looking around at all the lives that had been changed. "Mom and Dad sent us to summer camp to have fun and make friends. Instead, we found our life's purpose." Detective Chen overheard them and smiled. "And the world is safer because 2 little boys decided that other people's safety mattered more than their own comfort." Jake closed his eyes and thought about that scared 8-year-old who had first heard scratching in the wall. He had no idea that choosing to investigate those sounds would save thousands of lives. Sometimes the most important decisions we make happen when we're too young to understand their significance. Jake and Tommy's legacy would continue inspiring children for generations, teaching them that every voice matters, every observation counts, and every act of courage creates ripples that can change the world. This incredible true story of twin brothers who vanished at summer camp shows how real-life mysteries can have the most unexpected endings. What started as a chilling disappearance investigation became a documentary of courage that saved thousands of lives. The Martinez brothers' story proves that even the most suspenseful missing person cases can transform into something beautiful when disappeared persons are found after years of uncertainty. Their vanishing twins' mystery solved itself through bravery, turning a potential disaster story into hope. Sometimes the most famous missing person cases begin with children who refuse to ignore the unexplained disappearances happening around them, creating true suspense stories that change the world forever.